Well, apparently there were no worries about being late to this one because you're it.
Oh, okay.
Which is
Well, I haven't been to the accessibility, sessions last quarter.
okay.
But I heard from my colleagues because we discussed this in our meeting that by fall, or what's the contract now, by spring? Is it by spring or fall that we have to have our documents posted in Canvas,
Mm,
and the documents that we are giving out to students, it must be accessible, something like that. So I asked my colleagues to, walk me through the process, and I did.
nice,
And so
excellent.
I did that this summer. And I just want to, see if, I'm missing something or not. So,
Okay,
so
awesome,
I'm here.
wonderful. Excellent, I appreciate that. Okay, well, it looks like this is it. So I'm just going to start working my way through. So,
Okay.
okay, so hi, I'm Michael. I'm Accessible Technology Program Manager. And so, yeah, the reason why we are all gathered here today is to go over some of the contract language, because the language went into effect with the new contract, but I've gotten some feedback from a few faculty that they weren't exactly sure what the language meant. There were
Yeah.
concerns about you going, hey, like, are we going to get in trouble or anything,
Yeah.
or how serious is this? And so I wanted to try and talk about that and go through the language so everybody understands it, and to
Mhm.
try and calm some of the worries that are out there. So I couldn't get the remote clicker to work, so I'm going to end up standing over here by the podium.
And that's barely visible on Zoom. Is there a way for you to?
Oh, I forgot to share the screen. I'm sorry. Thank you,
Yeah, I
Prairie.
can.
This is why it's good to have someone else helping.
Okay, there. I'm seeing something now.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Prairie. That's very appreciated. Okay, I can just shove this over in the corner. Okay. So first things first. Hello, machine. There we are. First things first is don't panic. The whole point of this is to, the language is to make things, certain things easier. We're kind of codifying things that have already been in place. But we don't want this to be a big, scary thing. So we're not out to get anyone. This isn't about going to any of the instructors and saying your class isn't accessible enough, you're bad, or you're doing things wrong, or anything like that. Accessibility improvements aren't a magic overnight thing. We don't expect to be able to just flip a switch and magically everybody's class is perfectly accessible. Basically, the new language is just Highline's commitment to keeping accessibility in mind. And I'm here to help faculty anytime they need help in making sure that their classes are accessible. And a big part of this is that these commitments protect both you as faculty and the college. Now, one bit of caveat here is that I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't legal speak, but disability discrimination complaints are more likely when an institution or individual refuses to attempt to make accommodations. And we've seen this happen sometimes at other schools where a student requests an accommodation and the instructor basically says, no, that's too much of a change, I refuse. And just kind of stops the conversation there. And that's where things start to get a little tricky. But we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Having this language in the contract indicates that we take accessibility seriously at Highline. Mm-hmm. And in making improvements actively demonstrates our commitment, so that in the chance that someone actually makes some form of complaint, as people start looking, they're going to look at us and say, hey, they have this language, they're working with their faculty, the faculty are making changes. Maybe we couldn't meet this specific need, but we're proving that this is not an endemic problem within our campus, that we are working to make sure that we can do everything we can to make sure the classes are accessible. So it's, as I said, it's protecting Highline the college, and it's protecting our faculty. So just a bit of background, Highline adopted an accessible technology policy in 2017. Over the next few years, access services and educational technology kept the conversation going campus-wide. And then the contract language as it exists now was proposed. It was discussed with committees during negotiations, and then it was adopted and ratified when the contract was ratified in the fall of 22. So it's been around for a little bit, but we also know that not everybody reads the contract absolutely exhaustively. So just things to keep in mind when you're thinking about this is that improving accessibility is an ongoing process. As I said, it's not a magic switch. There's almost always something that can be improved, and you don't always know you don't always know what needs to be improved until we run into a situation where someone says, hey, this is a problem. And then we say, okay, let's see what we can do to fix that. So we understand that not every class is going to be the theoretically perfectly accessible class. We just want to make sure that people are working on it and making the strides as things go along. Perfect accessibility doesn't exist. It's a great target, but as I mentioned, there can at any point be a situation that just hadn't been thought about, or someone has particular needs. So there's no such thing as perfect accessibility, but we want to do, what we can to get as close to that as possible. Students with disabilities have always needed accommodations. In a lot of ways, this is just talking about something that's always existed. It's just that now we're paying more attention to it. Yeah, I mean, that's really about it. The students who need the extra assistance have always been here. And then designing with accessibility in mind as you create documents or as you add sections to your class, modules to your class, keeping accessibility in mind at that stage is much easier than just doing everything, finding out that someone needs accommodations, and then you need to figure out how to fix it or how to shoehorn it in. So again, it's just keeping this in mind as we go through classes. Why is this important? Making classes accessible with declared disabilities. These are the students that you might have where you get a letter from Access Services saying you have a student in your class who has this disability, needs these accommodations. Please make sure that that's taken care of. It's also about many students who don't declare disabilities, but they may still have them and therefore will benefit from having accessible materials. We know that not all students with disabilities declare. So we want to make sure that just because you don't know that there's someone with a disability in your class doesn't mean that there isn't. So having class prepared ahead of time is going to help them. Students without disabilities benefit as well. One of the key examples for this is with English language learners and captions on videos. Many times we think about captions as something that is needed for people with auditory disabilities or hard of hearing or deaf. But also English language learners gain a lot from being able to see the words written as they're hearing them spoken. And so there are all sorts of situations where improving the accessibility kind of raises the bar for everybody in the class, whether or not they have disabilities. It is a federal legal requirement. So again, if we were in a situation where just said someone said no, that would be a problem. And then this is something I've been noticing is that since the pandemic, accessibility scores within Canvas for the college have actually been dropping. This is the graph that I get to see kind of peeking into the back end of Ally, the accessibility tool that's built into Canvas for the entire campus. And you can see that for a number of years, this starts in 2013, for a number of years, we were on a slow but noticeable kind of upward trend until we hit right about spring of 22, right about the time we're coming back on campus from the pandemic, when it suddenly takes a fairly noticeable downturn. And we think there's a few reasons for that. We do think that some of it is a little bit of a misconfiguration that we just discovered with an Ally that is affecting some scores. But we've looked and that misconfiguration isn't enough to account for the entire downturn. We think a lot of that is that part of the improvement, especially at the end of the upward curve, was because we were all online. And so there was a lot more being done just in the process of putting things online. Just accessibility just kind of naturally improved with that. Then we stopped being online. A lot of people came back to campus and they weren't working as much electronically. They weren't thinking as much along those lines. And so all of a sudden things took a bit of a downturn. Hi, Leah. This is my room. I have one person on Zoom, so feel free to join us. So this is something that we've been noticing, and it's something we definitely want to address. So, I forgot to say this earlier because I was stumbling with getting started. But if you do have any questions at any point as this goes along, feel free to just shout out, especially since you're the only one here. You can interrupt me at any time if I go too fast or anything comes up. But just to start going through the language that's actually in the contract. So the first clause is that all course syllabi posted in Canvas must meet federal accessibility requirements. The college will provide guidelines and evaluation techniques to support faculty. So this specifically addresses syllabi. When we say federal accessibility requirements, this is some of the feedback we got when faculty started seeing this, is they said, what does that mean? That's very vague. And it is, we actually wrote it that way intentionally because federal accessibility requirements change over time. And we didn't want to lock something into the contract that we couldn't then adjust as things improved. Our current accessibility requirements are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG 2.0. That's what we decided on at the first as a good starting point. Those guidelines have actually been updated. Those were released in 2008. They've been updated a couple times since then. 2.2 was actually just released a few weeks ago. At some point, we'll probably be updating our gold standards to the more current ones, but we want to review those first to make sure there's nothing we really need to be aware of or let faculty know about when we do that. So at the moment, WCAG 2.0 is what that means. And this presentation will be available afterwards if you do want to download it and follow any of the links, because I know it's hard to click on them on a presentation like this. So if you really want to dig into the specifics, you can, but we're there to help with it. Highline provides an accessible syllabus template on the LTC Learning Technology Center, Learning and Teaching Center, the ltc.highline.edu site. It's a Google Docs template, and if you start from that and build it and just kind of copy and paste in, you should have a fairly accessible syllabus. You don't have to use that syllabus. It's just a good starting point for people who don't already have a syllabus. If you do create your own syllabus from your own template, you can work with us and we can review syllabi to make sure that they are accessible. If you have any questions, you can always send it to me and I'll take a quick look and let you know everything's good or these things could be tweaked. 4.2, the next clause goes into videos. If you use videos in your courses, all videos in the course must be accurately captioned by and here's where some of this language you mentioned earlier about when it has to be done. What we say is all videos in the course must be accurately captioned by the third quarter after summer quarter 22 in which the video is used, unless a student letter of accommodation requires earlier completion. The college will provide resources for faculty created videos as well as guidelines and resources for other videos. Now, the third quarter after summer quarter 22, that just comes in because summer quarter 22 is when this all started. So since we're already past that, what a lot of instructors can do is just kind of ignore that part and just by the third quarter in which it's used. So if you have a video that you've created that you're using class after class after class, that should be accurately captioned by the third quarter that you're using it. And that's really all that means. Basically, we give you 3 quarters to make sure things are accessible as they should be if you're using them quarter after quarter. You know, if you can do it earlier, that's great. The earlier, the better, especially because, as we say, unless a student letter of accommodation requires earlier completion. If a student needs captions or other accessibility measures, that's always going to trump the grace period. So that's part of why it's a good idea to think about these things as you're creating them rather than waiting until someone needs it. Again, the college will provide resources. The EdTech department or group or whatever that is has guidelines for captioning videos. Lots of instructions there. That's also something that I can help with. When you're putting videos up online, the best place to put them is Panopto. It's a system that's built into Canvas. Highline pays for it. It works. It integrates very well with Canvas. And we have it set up so that when you upload a video, it automatically creates AI-generated captions. So you don't have to do anything in particular. It just put the video up, and then usually for short videos, it might just be a few minutes. For longer videos, it might be a couple hours. Boom, you've got magic captions. Now, there will be errors. AI captioning is not perfect. It's getting better, but it's unlikely ever to be 100% perfect. You should review and correct those. The review and correct link there, if you were to download this presentation, goes to a YouTube video that I made going over Highlines captioning options and how you can go into Panopto and make edits and make corrections to the captions. And then our goal is what we're calling materially accurate, which doesn't mean 100%, doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. What we do want to make sure is that there are no errors that will affect grades. So if there's something in the captions that says it got miscaptioned, it says something wrong, we want to make sure that a student who does rely on those captions is not going to fail an assignment, a quiz, a test, because that's the information they were given. So we just recommend that with AI captioning, you go in, you take a look, you skim over the captions, make sure that there's nothing just really egregiously wrong that's going to affect your students. And, if you want to go in and do a really good job of perfecting it all, feel free to take the time, but you don't have to do that. We just want to make sure that the students aren't going to have problems. We do not recommend at all using Google Drive to host videos, which we know some faculty will do. They'll just record a video, throw it on the drive, and then throw the link in Canvas. The first and the biggest reason for this, even though it's convenient, is that does not provide captions. There's no automatic captioning. It's just going to be the video and nothing else. It is technically possible to add captions to Google Drive videos if you really want to do that, if you really want to use Google Drive, but you're going to have to type up the captions in the right format, get the timing right, add them yourself, and it is a process, which we don't recommend. So we just use Panopto, use YouTube, but don't use Google Drive. Moving on to just the general accessible instruction. Now, again, here's something you were talking about with just documents and everything. Kind of similar language to the videos. Electronic content used in the course, so scanned journal or magazine articles, Canvas course pages, files, images, must meet accessibility requirements, but by the third quarter, in which they are used, unless a student letter accommodation requires earlier completion. And again, the college will provide guidelines, resources, and evaluation techniques to support faculty. So again, we're here. And so Canvas has good accessibility tools built in, both on its own and with Ally. I have a number of resources. We have resources online, everything from help documents on the accessibility web pages to YouTube videos that I have created and will be creating more of, explaining how to make sure documents are accessible. I have open Zoom hours. I'm available by email. Basically, we're here to help. And while it can seem a little daunting at first, once you get the basics down, it's actually fairly easy to do. But that's what I'm here for, is to make sure that you can do it and it's not terribly scary. Some things to watch out for as you're creating documents. I'm going to go really briefly. This isn't going to go in depth, but just a brief a few things to touch on. Headings in documents. So documents that do not have headings are difficult to skim. As sighted users, we skim documents by looking for headings. We'll take a look at a page and we're like, okay, that's a bold, slightly larger font, maybe it's centered on the page, and boom, there's a heading. We can very easily skim through a document and see how it's broken up into sections. Visually disabled do this as well. Visually disabled users do this as well, but headings need to exist for them to do this. Simply styling text using bold or italic size or color does not create a heading. All it does is change the way the text looks. For someone who's visually disabled, if they're using a screen reader and they're hearing everything, there's nothing to tell them that this line of text is any different than any other line of text. So they can't hear headings unless you use the Styles menu. This is available both in Microsoft Word and Google Docs and other programs. There's a Styles menu that lets you add headings that assistive technology can find, headings 1 through 6. It's also available in the Canvas page editor. In fact, that one actually starts with heading level 2 for technical reasons I could get into some other time. But yeah, so make sure that if you're putting a heading into a document, you use that headings menu. You tell it this is a heading level 1 or this is a heading level 2. It will change the way it looks. So you'll have the formatting change for sighted users. but assistive technology users will also be able to use their technology to say, basically they press a key and it brings up a list of every header in the document that they can skip down and then jump down to that section. But again, the headers have to be there for them to do that. Alt text on images. Images without an alt text, it just means alternative text. It's a text version of the image. Images without text are essentially invisible. At best, the student might hear the word graphic to tell them that there is a graphic on the page. At worst, they'll hear nothing and won't even know that anything is there. So if an image includes important information, it should have alt text explaining what the reader needs to understand. And deciding what important information is can be a little bit of a mix of science and art. Like if there's a photograph that's being used on a page, it might be, why is that photograph there? Does it show something in particular? If it's just like a photograph of students, maybe there's particular things that we want to know about those students. Like with Highline being a multicultural campus, if we have a web page talking about our student population and we put a picture of students on there, on the one hand, it's just a picture of students. But on the other hand, maybe the students of various races, various gender identities, maybe some of the students are wearing hijabs and some are not. There's different things, details that are important in that image. Alt text, it does not have to be literal or super detailed as long as the information is conveyed. I actually don't know quite what you teach, but if you're in STEM or the sciences, you might have documents with a table showing temperature ranges for 7 different cities across 14 years. I'm making all this up. And so the alt text doesn't have to mimic the entire table. What it would say is a table of temperature differences in several cities. It is notable that every city temperature has increased year over year over the year. So it's not a literal description of what's in the table, but it is describing what the table means and the information that the student should be getting out of it. And again, thinking about this, one way to think about alt text is how would you describe the image to someone over the phone? It's just, what's important about the image, what's important about the picture. PDFs. PDFs can be very accessible. However, it really needs to be designed in from the start, or it takes a lot of work after the fact. Most PDFs are actually not accessible. This includes documents that have been scanned to PDF. For instance, if you have a journal article that you had on paper or in a book and you used the department copier to scan and email it to you, that's not going to be accessible. Documents printed to PDF. If you've made a document in Word and you choose print to PDF, that won't be accessible. Word has a save as PDF command that works, but printing to PDF does not work. Documents created with Canva. This is one that I'm running into more and more often. Canva, I don't know if you've used it, but it's a very popular online document creation tool. It makes very pretty documents. It's good for flyers and such things. However, accessibility is obviously not a concern of theirs. And the PDFs that they create range anywhere from not being readable at all, where a screen reader will just say this page has no text, to a screen reader might be able to read the text, but it'll read it completely out of order. It'll be jumping around the page and it will just garble things until they make no sense. So Canva is really something I cannot recommend. And then many documents downloaded from databases, unfortunately, because a lot of times they've done this. They've scanned it to PDF. They've printed it to PDF. And so you don't always know. So PDFs, what I've come down to is asking, does it really have to be a PDF? Why make it a PDF at all? A lot of us over the years have gotten in the habit of just, we're handing something out, we're passing something out, we create it, we print a PDF, we throw it out there. But the question is, does there really need to be a PDF? Some people are concerned about locking things down so the information isn't changed. I see this a lot with syllabi or such things. And in that case, well, you're I kind of look at it as you're the instructor, you have the master document. If a student tries to change something and come back to you and say, no, mine says this, I think you're going to win that, that discussion. a lot of stuff that we've been locking down doesn't really need to be, I don't think really needs to be locked down at all. Original documents are more accessible. A well-formatted Word document is often best. Google Docs can be, but a lot of times what I recommend is actually exporting from Google Docs. You can create in Google Docs, but I recommend exporting it to a Word document before, rather than sending a Google Docs link. Just because the Google Docs interface, again, they've built accessibility in, but it's definitely a kind of a secondary thing, and it can be very confusing to navigate. But a good, well-formatted Word document is often best. Text can reflow for different sized screens. We know that a lot of students these days are working not just from computers at home, but they have laptops, they have tablets, they have phones. A lot of them are scrolling through things on the bus. If you're distributing the PDF, if you've ever tried to view a PDF on a phone screen, you know that it's a lot of pinching. It's zooming in, zooming out, scrolling, sliding it back and forth to try and read a full line. It's kind of a mess. If they have a Word document, they can bring it up in an editor and all the text just squeezes down so it fits in the screen and they can scroll through it. Much easier to deal with. Readers can use assistive tech, or they can do things like adjust the font, color, and size to meet their needs. Students with visual disabilities might have, students with learning disabilities like dyslexia often find there are different fonts that make it easier for them to read. With visual disabilities, they might want to change the color or increase the size of the font. Again, these are things they can do with a Word document that they're not able to do with a PDF document where it's locked down. And then using utilities like text-to-speech that allows the computer or the mobile device to read out loud is much easier with the native document like a Word, with an original document like a Word document rather than a PDF. So there are just all sorts of reasons why I just not a big fan of PDFs in most situations. There are some where they come in handy, but for the most part, I don't think it really needs to be a PDF. Now, this last clause is what is the longest and the most maybe intimidating up front. But again, it's not really that bad. And this is when you're getting into a new class and you're adopting a new, you're looking at textbooks or maybe instructional software. All commercial online textbooks, so this includes both just online only and physical textbooks with an online component. All commercial online textbooks and instructional software used in a course must have an accessibility.
I have a question in the chat.
Yes.
So Barbara wants to know, she has a test that's delivered remotely through Canvas, and she used the quiz manager in Canvas to create it. Will that quiz be accessible?
The best answer I can give off the top of my head is probably. I don't know because that's not something that I have personally used. That's part of Canvas I haven't used and I haven't tested, so I can't speak from personal experience. But I do know that Canvas is very good about building accessibility into their tools. And we as Highline and we as the SBCTC, the Community State Board for Community Technical Colleges, I actually serve on one of the committees called CATO, the Committee for Accessible Technology Oversight. And we regularly work with Canvas and other vendors that SBCTC contracts with when we do find accessibility issues to say, hey, this needs to be fixed, and then they'll go back and do their thing and fix it. So I don't know for sure, but I'd say probably you're in good shape.
Graphic elements.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah, because we have several faculty who are, delivering their test via Canvas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's hard to say. I'd say if there are Perry asked if there are graphical elements, like if there are images being used. Again, as long as those images have had alt text defined, which Canvas makes it very easy to do, then my best guess is it's probably fine. But again, that's a best guess. I'd have to actually go in and play with it to be absolutely sure.
I have been lucky, Michael, because no one has ever no one ever had any problems about accessibility regarding the test in Canvas. So I don't have any problems yet.
Excellent, good. Hopefully it stays that way. Okay. So jumping back to this, commercial online textbooks, if you're adopting a new textbook, and instructional software used in course must have an accessibility conformance report, such as a voluntary product accessibility template or VPAT, and an equally effective alternative access plan or EAP on file with the college at the time of adoption. OER materials and software must be reviewed by college staff and an EAP filed by the third quarter in which they're used. For both commercial and OER materials, procuring the VPAT and creating the EAP is a partnership between faculty and college accessible technology experts. Like I said, that's the longest. It's got a lot of acronyms in it. It's one that may sound the scariest, but it's really not all that bad. What it means is that we want, when new technology, new materials are being adopted, we need to know how accessible they are. And if there are areas where they're not entirely accessible, we need to make sure that we have a plan for how to deal with that. So a voluntary product accessibility template, or a VPAT, is basically just a statement from the publisher documenting how a resource meets accessibility requirements. It's a kind of a spreadsheet looking document that goes through those same accessibility requirements I mentioned earlier, the WCAG, the WCAG 2.0, or whatever version the conformance report is using. It goes through the WCAG requirements and just line by line, here's the requirement, yes, we meet this standard, or no, we do not meet this standard, but we're working on it, or no, this doesn't apply to us, or just basically goes line by line to say how accessible something is or is not.
So do you recommend, Michael, that I, check with the book rep? Because I switched from, this is with my online statistics course. I switched from Connect Math to Alex. This is my second quarter of using Alex.
Okay.
So I should probably check with the book rep about this requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Is this a resource that other faculty here are using? Do you know, or is this something that you found?
No. I think right now I'm the only one who's using Alex.
Okay. Because in that case, yes, please do. And generally, publishers. I mean, this has been around long enough that publishers.
Yeah. Alex has been around long enough.
Yeah, Alex isn't new. It should probably be pretty good.
Okay, so both Alex and VPATs, so they should be able to, the representative should be able to just say, okay, here it is. And then you can forward that along to me, and I can take a quick look at it, or even if you'd be interested, I can go over it with you. Just say, okay, here's what I'm seeing. Here's the things we should be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, awesome. And then what we'll do is we'll take that and we'll file it away. And we have a web page up with information about VPATs and EAPs, where there's actually a link to a spreadsheet that we're building, but it will eventually list every resource that someone is using, and whether or not, do we have a VPAT? How old is it? Does it need to be refreshed? And so in theory, if you were in this sort of situation, you could start by going to this spreadsheet and saying, oh, hey, this other instructor is already using this and they got the VPAT just 6 months ago, so no, I'm good to go. Or they're using it, but the VPAT's 2 years old, so I need to ask about a new one. So we're working on building that resource out.
So can I just tell them to contact you, Michael?
Yes, I'd say CC me in, and I can work with them directly. We want to make sure that the faculty involved in this process. So I'm perfectly happy to be part of the process, but we also want to make sure that it's not just the faculty are just kind of pushing this off onto me, both because that'd be a lot of work for me, and because we want to make sure that you know what's going on too. So it keeps everybody involved in the conversation. But yes, feel free to include me on the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. So all newly adopted commercial resources should have a VPAT. We'll review it for accessibility issues. As people get more familiar with it, you might do this yourself, or like I said, you can work with me on it. If there are a lot, or if there are particular serious accessibility issues, we may say, maybe this isn't the best choice. You should look for something else. But in most cases, there will probably be a few, because like I said, nothing's 100% accessible. But in most cases, that's fine. We identify if there are issues, we identify what they are. And then we fill out an EAP, which I will get to more in a couple slides, for any of those known but acceptable limitations. So with open educational resources, if you use those, because OER material is self or community published,
Oh.
it's unlikely to have VPAT. Yes.
Wow. Almost all of our classes are using OER textbooks.
Excellent. Yes, we
It's
do
interesting
recommend
to
that.
know that it's unlikely to have a VPAT. So
Yeah, because it is, a lot of it is just instructors who have compiled a resource over time, and they're putting it out there under a Creative Commons license. It's all their own work, and so they're not a big publisher, they're not a big company.
yeah,
They're not always going to have the resources or even the knowledge and skills to have a formal VCAT created. Now, sometimes there may be someone who's aware of all this stuff, so they may have an accessibility statement. They might say something like, "I've done my best, but I know that there are these areas where it's not where work isn't finished." They may have an accessibility statement of some sort, and that's great. If no accessibility information is available, then we want to make sure the material is reviewed for accessibility before adoption. And again, that's something where you get a hold of me. And a lot of times I'll just take a look. It won't be a full like VPAT style exhaustive review, but I'll at least take a look for the most common situations that we run into. And if it's things that can be fairly easily taken care of, great. If I run into something where I'm just like, no, this book has 852 images, none of which have alt text, then I might say, here's where we might want to look into something else. Or at least think very seriously about what you would, if you really want to use this resource, think very seriously about what you would do if you had a student who was visually disabled. How would you make sure that they were getting the information that they needed out of it? And that's where the EAP comes in. So all adopted OER material should have an EAP on file, just the same as any commercial textbooks. So basically everything, any new software technology, and that includes like electronic textbooks, should have an EAP, which I'll get into now. That's the Equally Effective Alternative Access Plan. And it's what I just kind of touched on. It's a plan for how to assist students with material that is not accessible to them, because we know there are going to be situations where this happens. And it's a proactive approach to a situation that has always existed. I mean, if you've been teaching for a while, or if you haven't, you can just think about it. But like 10, 15, 20 years ago, when a lot of this stuff was new, or 40 years ago when we didn't have computers nearly as much, teachers still had deaf students. They still had blind students. They still had to teach these students. So they had to figure out ways to say, okay, to get that information across. This is the same basic idea. It's just an EAP, it's a plan. It makes sure that rather than waiting until someone says, I can't do this, and then having to figure out, oh, okay, now what do I do now? It doesn't have to be huge and really detailed, but it's at least some thought of saying, okay, if I were to be in this situation, this is how we would accommodate that. This is how we would work with the student. Or maybe, we might work with the student directly. We might bring in access services to see how they can help, what technology there is available that might mitigate this. But it's a plan, so we know that you're thinking ahead just in case something happens. So a simple example, a printed article has a graph with important information. How would you convey the information to a visually disabled student? Could be something just like explaining it to them, and maybe maybe there's a friend of theirs in class that you could make arrangements to help them. Maybe there might be technological solutions. I have a special printer in my office that will print raised graphics, so a visually disabled user could actually feel like maybe the slope of a graph or something like that. So there are all sorts of ways that we might be able to deal with this issue, should it arise.
Barbara wants to make sure that this PowerPoint will be available so that she can share some of this with her department.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But there will be a
thank you.
Yep, there'll be a,
Yeah,
link.
because, there's a push to, use free, free stuff for students.
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, this past 2 years, we actually were working on using OER materials.
Excellent.
And faculty now have a choice of using, those commercial textbooks and online systems. Although I have not used the WAMAP, which is free for students,
Mm-hmm.
because I see the limitations on those um, products, and so but my colleagues are actually using OER.
Yeah, excellent. And
Yeah.
WAMAP is one that I know. That's another one where, as a higher level organization, the SBCDC, Cato are in contact with the people behind WAMAP, because that's a locally developed piece of software, to make sure that
Okay.
that they continue updating that and
Okay.
working on accessibility too. So it's a good resource to have.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the access plan helps make sure you're not scrambling when accommodations are needed. And as I said, I'm here to help with all of this. More information about VPAS and eApps is available on our website. I made a presentation about it that's on my YouTube channel, or you can just drop me a line. This is something you may be familiar with. This was kind of written in mind. I was thinking might have a few more faculty, maybe some of the new faculty. So I threw this in, but so I'll probably just kind of flip through this one pretty quickly. But in Canvas, there's the Ally support tool. When you're editing pages, Ally adds the little accessibility meter at the top. Is that a question or just a yes?
Oh, I'm familiar with that meter.
Yep, absolutely. It's pretty, it's a little, it's not huge, but it's kind of in your face. And then
I know.
clicking on the meter, just, it'll say, okay, this isn't quite accessible. Here's things you can improve. And it'll walk you through improving the accessibility of your Canvas pages. Ally also gives a course accessibility report, which is an overview of the entire course's accessibility. So it'll actually go through the entire Canvas course, all the pages and the linked documents and videos, looking for common errors. And then it'll give you a list of what errors it found, how many there are, and links to them so you can go in and correct them. So this is a screenshot of one that I made of my, a test course that I keep around. The Ally Course Accessibility Report shows up in the left-hand sidebar. If it's not there normally, you can activate under settings the same way you change your menu. And you can see that on my test course is at 87%, which is pretty good, but of course it can be better. There are things I could do to improve that, which I don't because this is a demo course, but but then as you scroll down that page, it gives you this list that'll say, this image, okay, the image does not have description, so no alt text. I've got 4 images without alt text. The heading structure does not start at the right level. Basically, headings should go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I might have a page here where the headings start at heading level 3. There's no heading level 1 or 2. The assistive tech user might be confused. Did I miss something? Why does it start at level 3? So, but it'll just go through and give you a list of everything it finds in your course that could be that could and should be corrected. And then again, we have that at the institutional level. This is where the institutional accessibility report gives an overview of the college's course accessibility. It gives us an aggregate accessibility score and details the most common errors. Again, the types of errors are listed. This is where that graph I got earlier with that downturn. This is where I get that. But then this is as of yesterday, these are the most common errors for all of Highline's, for Highline's entire Canvas installation. So now this is the entire installation. So this, I believe, has courses that go back years. But even so, alt text is our number 1 thing. We have 42,703 images in our Canvas courses that do not have alt text. 13,000 documents that have contrast issues. This means like maybe there's dark gray text on a light gray background. It's a design choice, but it's one that makes things hard to read. Certain color combinations don't work well together. So we have, okay, the document contains images without a description. Almost 13,000 of those. This is the same thing as missing alt text. The difference is that the top line is a Canvas web page. Line number 3 is a document, like a Word document or something that is part of the course that where its images don't have alt text. We have documents that do not have any heading, so it's impossible for assistive text user to skim through. The documents have tables that don't have any headers. Tables are another area where things can get tripped up. Documents that don't have a title, so there's nothing to announce. This is what you are reading at the top. There's a little over 9,000 of those. Anyway, it's just a kind of a peek at these are the things that are most commonly tripping people up within their Canvas courses. And so these are the things that we want to target fixing. And how do I do? Well, I'm good on time. Excellent. So, yeah. So I could send this directly to you. Actually, probably the one of you here. But you can also there's the bit.ly link there on screen. If you scan that QR code, it'll drop you into the folder. It'll have the presentation either as the PowerPoint or as a PDF, but it is an accessible PDF. Or you can drop me a line point, and that's all I had. Do you have any more other questions that haven't come up already? Because I would happily burble on.
Well, so far, yeah, thank you for this presentation. Again, I have not been to your, to accessibility sessions in the past, and so that's why I came today. And I just wish, some of my colleagues in the math department were here. So, yeah, regarding that OER materials, I'm very interested in that because again, most of our math classes most of our math instructors are using the OER textbooks. And
so math textbooks can be so expensive. That's great. Yeah, math, STEM fields in general, but math is certainly part of this, is one of the areas where accessibility can be a little bit more difficult because of mathematical equations, graphs, things along those lines. And there are a few different ways to approach that. Honestly, it's an area that I'm still working on learning because there's so much that can go into that. But with math equations, there are math jacks. There's coding languages that can be used to try and create accessible math equations that can be typed out and read, and they're actually the characters, and they'll read through the equation correctly. Sometimes, some textbooks will use that. Some will use they will just create an equation and then they'll put that into a document as an image and then use alt text to explain the equation. Graphs very much the same way. There's no graphs use a lot of alt text, just trying to explain what's going on in the graph. As I said, I've got a special printer that can do raised stage printing if there's a student for whom that might be beneficial. And we don't want people to freak out too much about this. We want to make sure that people are looking into this and paying attention to it. But we also realize that there are instructors who may go quarters, years without actually having a student in their class with visual disabilities. And sadly, because it is so difficult, a lot of people with visual disabilities who might be interested in math kind of fall out of it early on because it is so difficult for them to access the material. So, the reality is you may not ever be faced with a situation where this happens, but we want to make sure that we're not just kind of relying on that. So I'm never going to have to worry about this. So We do realize that math and STEM fields in general can be more difficult to hit the accessibility targets that we like, but we don't want that to be a scary thing, and that's part of why I started with this with Don't Panic. We know that perfect accessibility is not really a thing. We just want to do, you know, what we can to get as close as possible.
Yeah, well, thank you for this information, Michael.
Yes,
Glad
thank you for
that
stopping by. I figured coming into this, I would either have a room like this. I'd either be the most or the least popular presentation today, but so thank you for stopping by. And it's not just me in the room with Perry helping me out.
Okay, well, thanks again.
Absolutely. Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And with that, I will just go ahead and shut it down. So, stop sharing. Oh, thank you for copying those links in. Still recording. Oh, yes, I am. All right. Stop.